What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive. And here we are. This is actually going to be a little bit bigger of a podcast because we're going to cover 2 weeks here because you went out of town.
Yeah, I was on vacation last week, and so we skipped the podcast. But we'll catch up. We won't make them super long, but we can talk about what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks in church, and I think that should go well.
Yeah.
And
well, we want to hear about the trip, but let's roll the credits first, and then we'll get into that.
Let's do it. Okay.
So, Dave, you went to Florida, is that right?
No.
Where'd you go?
It's actually technically Alabama. I was in Gulf Shores.
Oh, Gulf Shores, okay.
But you know, I was looking at a map. There's not that much coast in Alabama.
Yeah,
it's just a very short little space right there in the panhandle of the Gulf.
Yeah.
Where it's there. No, we're at Gulf Shores. My family, which is me and Teresa, but also my daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter, we're down there with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law and their 3 kids,
right,
adult kids, and their granddaughter. So we had rented a house next to the bay and just had a great week. Ate a lot, you know.
What kind of beach person are you? Are you one of those that like you go, you put your chair down and you sit there all day? Or are you one of those that like stays in the water? Do you walk up and down the coast
kind
and
of
pick all
both.
the stuff?
No, I'm not a real like let's go for long walks on the beach. You know, we had some boogie boards and we tried to do those and got that. I will say that the waves aren't great there, but yeah, we had fun. We went to the beach 2 or 3 days and one day recover from the sun and the beach. But yeah, it was a great week.
Good.
It was a great week. It's good to be back. A lot to get caught up on, but yeah.
Yeah, you've been quite the traveling man here recently with your trip up north, which
so that's
really
a good segue. That's a real good segue.
You knew where I was going. Okay, why don't you finish it out there?
Yeah, so we are, and what we're going to be talking about here today and the next couple of weeks is a message series that we're in called The Expedition, Path to an Intentional Life. And so where the idea of this came from was I had this group of pastors that I travel and study with, and we were looking at Lewis and Clark for this trip. And so we began, you know, we made the plan for it several months ago. And so since that time, I've been reading and studying, watching some actually YouTube videos. I watched the Ken Burns documentary on Lewis and Clark and really studying about Lewis Clark. And along the way, I thought, wow, these are such great, strong images that this would be a good thing to lean into for a sermon series. And so that's how the expedition and it, you know, it kind of looks like a journey or a hike or whatever, a lot of the branding that we're using with it. So that's where it came from. And so it's not, as I've tried to point out, and I'm really trying not to make it into a history lesson about Lewis and Clark, but there are some real, I think, strong life lessons that can be applied spiritually and theologically to it. So that's where we are. And
well, I appreciated how you kind of started off by saying, like, you know, I did go out there as like part of this like pastor growing opportunity, but I'm not going to lie, I was also looking for sermon illustrations. So.
I was, and I was more prepared. Now, we did another trip, and I'll say this briefly, and then we'll get into the meat of the podcast. Yeah. But yeah, when we went out to New Mexico, just the nature of the conversations that we have with that group, there were illustrations that came out of that as well. I think I leaned into a lot more on my Wednesday night, but some on Sunday morning. In fact, my major illustration that I used on Easter came from that trip. So I knew that I was going to pick up on some things and see some things that were going to be good. And so, and I did. And, you know, and this week, wait till this week. This week's my favorite so far. But anyway, so that's where we started. And, you know, in mapping, I don't really title my sermons. I title the series, but if I were giving a title to the first week, it would be Mapping the Journey. That's what I put in Planning Center for Melody and all them. And, you know, we looked at and the other thing you might notice from the first 2 weeks, and it will continue, is I'm also using and drawing from very well-known scriptures. this time of year, it just seemed like we needed a series like this to kind of set our direction. And so the scripture for that day was trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. And so mapping the journey, and it's who are you going to trust for the journey? And it really kind of began with this point of like, are we living our lives in intentional ways? Mm-hmm. Because, even those who follow Jesus, we can fall into this sort of trap of just doing whatever is coming next because life gets so busy, right? Yeah. And instead of really living with intention, we're more reacting in the moment. And so there's really not a plan for our life. But Lewis and Clark, they had a mission. They were given to them by Thomas Jefferson. The major part of it was they were trying to find a water route that they could to the Pacific Ocean. But they also, the United States had just purchased Louisiana Purchase, and so they had all this unmapped territory. They wanted to see what was out there. So, they went out there with a specific mission to find this way, but also, to make contact with the Native American tribes that were out there because they knew enough to know that they were there to see what the landscape looked like. So they were looking at different plants and animals. And Lewis was an artist, and so he would draw pictures and stuff. And they would even send specimens back to Jefferson. And so, they had this mission that they were on, but a lot of it was kind of going off the map, particularly when they got to Montana, where I was. And so, I really focused on like we have a mission too as Christians, mm-hmm. And so are we following that? Are we living into that? Or are we just reacting in our life? And I think the word I used was drifting, because it's very easy for us to drift, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You know what I mean? Like if there's not some intentionality behind your time and your setup, that you're gonna lose a lot of time and potentially not succeed at.
Yeah, if you're not aiming, I think if you're aiming for a target, not aiming for the target, you're gonna miss it every time.
Yeah,
and so yeah. So that's kind of where we started. And I guess maybe I would start with this question to you. What is the difference between living a plan for your life and actually living an intentional life? And you can interpret that however you can in your life. How do you find that?
Can you rephrase the question? Because I think you might have said the same thing kind of twice.
Yeah.
How do I plan to live an intentional life versus a drifting life?
Like do you find yourself in different times of your life? Because you're a very busy person. You have a very busy job, important job here.
Yeah.
But you also have 2 daughters. You're also a coach. You have a lot of things going on. How do you do that with intention instead of just like what's next on the schedule or some emergency happens that throws you off? Yeah.
Yeah. I would honestly, if I could be very vulnerable about that, is I don't know that I always do a great job.
Well, it's
something. It's something that I'm kind of learning to work through and process. But a lot of it really starts with identifying the things that I really want to be and letting those goals guide how I dictate that time. Mm-hmm. Because I recognize that. Actually, this is one of the things when I was in therapy that he kind of helped me see is just like there's only so many places that can hold you can only be stretched in so many different directions. So being intentional with which directions you're willing to stretch from, mm-hmm. And understanding that to not fill your plate 100% at the initial, because there's always going to be other things that are trying to push that. So I've really tried to simplify in areas of my life, which again, I'm not always great at this, and sometimes I still overcommit, but I've tried to simplify into things like what's the most important things for me to be. And, at the top of those lists in no particular order, I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good leader in the church work that I do. I want to be giving back to the community. You know what I mean? So I kind of put those top 4 things up there and say, okay, how am I intentionally doing these things. And then if I've got extra room, I like coaching volleyball. And do you know what I mean? Like,
So you're talking about setting priorities.
correct.
Yeah, that's important.
A long way to say, I try to set priorities. That's
Yeah,
how I help.
yeah. I think that's important too, because we can get if everything is equal, because everything comes at us and as important, but some things, if they're fitting into your life purpose or are setting priorities, they're not as well. And I have the same struggles. I hate going to bed at night feeling like there was something important that I should have done that I didn't do.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just my own headspace. And so I think when you say, okay, these are the truly important things that I am trying to do and trying to be. And so, yeah.
Those are the things that tend to keep me up at night, is when I don't do the priority things. You know what I mean? I'm like, how am I going to get that done? Blah, blah, blah. Like, so knocking some of those priority things off and making sure I did them well are actually what helps me rest better. Yeah.
The perfectionist part of me, I remember one time I was with a colleague, and we were in some classroom. Somebody had written on the whiteboard, sometimes good enough is good enough. And both of us, with our perfectionist quality, kind of pushed back on that. I don't believe that, the good enough is good enough. But, there are some things that are lesser priorities that sometimes good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's okay to say no. And so, I think when we're setting the priorities, and I think, one of the major points is who is the guide for our life, setting who is the person that we're trusting as a guide for our life.
Yeah.
Because if we're letting everything else in the world set those things, but if we're looking to God, then it's going to be a different set of priorities and circumstances.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it's a really good reminder to understand that we're all following something. Mm-hmm. And, even if it's something simple like sports or whatever, we're all following something. So what is it that we're following behind? And I think to your point, it would be, hopefully we're looking to God to set those paths. So we're following God's intention for our life. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But we're all following. And if you don't know what that is, you might need to check it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then the other thing that I'd like for us to talk about is one of the main points that, like, the Bible doesn't necessarily set a GPS for every turn in our lives, mm-hmm. right? I think lots of times if you really dig down in the Scripture, God is much more important of what we're all on a journey somewhere.
Yeah,
I think God is very, very concerned with what kind of person that we're becoming on that journey. Less so than like what every little turn is going to be on that journey.
Yeah.
But how are we taking the experiences of life, the places we go, the places that we are led, and how are we developing through those experiences into the person that God wants us to be more Christ-like in our manner, and be more faithful in our following. And so I think that's a really important underlying theme that goes throughout this series. What kind of person are we becoming on the journey?
Yeah.
And so one of the stories that I told was actually something that I didn't see out there. It's actually something I read in one of the books on
in preparation for it.
Yeah, for the journey, and it was something that Meriwether Lewis wrote. Go ahead and read the quote. It's sort of in the archaic language of the time, but we can break it down. But it happened like they had, at this point, they were 2 years into this journey. And where they were on the journey was they were about to have to face the Rocky Mountains. They were on the horizon. They were going to have to get through the horizon. And so Meriwether Lewis had a birthday. And so he was a famous journalist. We know a lot about this trip because both of them wrote so much in their journals.
Right.
So he writes this on his birthday. This day I completed my 31st year. I reflected that I had as yet done but little very little indeed to further the happiness of the human race. Not sure I'd put it that way, but it's archaic language. I dashed from me the gloomy thought and resolved in my future to redouble my exertions. And so here he is. He's on this journey of historical journey, not just a journey of a lifetime, a journey of history that he is on. They've already faced so many things. They're going to face other things as well. But he's not concerned about like asking, okay, what are we going to do to get over the Rockies or what preparations? He's writing about like, I could do better. I can be a better person. I have not contributed enough for humanity. And Lewis, who I think he was Jefferson's secretary, he had lived this lifetime of public service, and now he's doing this huge public service, and yet he's still saying, I could do more. Yeah. And so to me, it sort of embodies this idea of he's more interested in the person that he's becoming more than the journey of how he's going to get over the Rocky Mountains. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that does. That's kind of cool. And I wonder what it was that turned him into like that introspective, kind of looking to himself. You know what I mean? Like, because I remember when I went to Montana, and I don't know if you kind of felt the same way, is when you see the mountains out there the first time, you feel very small.
Yeah,
like everything feels very like you just kind of feel insignificant in the vastness and the greatness of it. And I imagine them walking up to the Rockies had to feel very similar to that. It's like, whoa, look at all of that compared to what I experienced.
Well, and I hadn't even considered that, but yeah, that the landscape might have influenced him in that way of realizing, look, I'm just this one person with this one life, and how am I going to live it? As I see the vastness of God's creation. Yeah, it's very cool. It's a good way of thinking of it. So anyway, I ended that sermon with giving. I try to give points that people can take away, and so there were three points that I gave. One is that pause before you proceed. Sometimes we just need to take a minute, before we make a big decision, before we're, I think it's just pause to reflect, pause to pray. I think I'd said that, one of the things is that, I bet you some high percentage of people in our congregation, if you ask them, what is the very first thing that you do in the morning? What is the very first thing you do? And it's usually look at your phone, grab that phone. And just, that wasn't the same as 15 years or so, but we're so attached to that. Or maybe, for me, before I do anything, it's got to make coffee. But what if before we did anything else, just kind of paused and said a prayer and just sort of meditate, God, what do you want me to do with this day? Where do you want to lead me on this day? Before you even get out your to-do list, before you check the news, the sports, that sort of stuff, just take that point, how that might shape our lives. I've started doing, I haven't been faithful about this my whole life, but, in the last years, I've tried to start the day with a devotion and a prayer before I do anything else. And I've watched my wife and my daughter do similar things, and it's made such a big difference in their life. And, I just really encourage people just to start before they do anything else in a day, to pause before they react and before they go on. The second was...
Get out of bed first, though.
Yeah.
Because you'll go back to sleep.
Yeah, sure.
I would.
Yeah. The other, and just trying to start small was just like surrender one decision to God.
Yep.
Now, of course, we're supposed to surrendering our whole life to God, but I'm guessing that most people have something big that they're got going on in their life. And so before we trust in our internal GPS, because a lot of us have opinions and ideas, let's surrender that to God and ask, God, what's your will for that? And then the other thing, and it was important, and we'll get into that more, not this week, but the fourth weekend, that was walk with other travelers. Of course, they had this group that went with Lewis and Clark. There was a lot of intention in that. They just weren't like, hey, who's up for, an adventure? They had to at least have a little bit of adventuresome spirit.
Right.
But they created this team, the Core of Discovery, just a very diverse group of skill sets that they had, from people who were trappers and hunters to people who were good at, navigating things, people who knew how to build things, military people, they didn't know what they were going to, all that along the way. And she won't show up to the last time, but some of the Native Americans that they encountered along the way who were just super important to this journey. So the last one was walk with other travelers, because we don't get through this life alone. We need other people to help us along with our journey. And so that was pretty much the first week, and then this second week, this last sermon, we looked at an important question. The first week we had asked, who are you going to trust as to be the guide for that? But the second is, what happens when you're trusting that guide and suddenly you find yourself in a very difficult situation, a place that you never intended in being? How did you get there? And what do you do at that point? And so the way that we broke that down was to look at Psalm 23.
Yeah.
Another very
popular,
very familiar psalm, which a lot of people even know by memory. Of course, they know the King James version. We looked at another translation on Sunday.
You went to NIV, and in my head I kept going, "Thy rod and thy staff comfort me."
I guess that's the way we hear it a lot.
Yeah.
But as I was studying and reading that, I noticed something I had never noticed, and that was the change in the pronoun, because it starts out, the Lord is my shepherd. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. And so in that space, along the way, as you're navigating, there are green pastures. There's, this refreshing water. There's places our soul gets restored. So thank goodness for that. Thank God for that. But then almost immediately goes, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you have this change in pronouns. And so where the first part he's talking about God, now he is talking to God. Because when we go through those difficult places, that's when our prayer life often gets very serious, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is one of those things that this is probably one of the verses that kind of solidified some of my core faith beliefs, is because this verse really embodies the sense of life of there's going to be these nice, easy, peaceful, fulfilling comfort times. But then there's also going to be these harder times, but that God's still with you through all of that. And
Amen. Yeah.
When you think about the idea of the shepherd and all that, how he leads his flock through both of these terrains, but he's the protecting force in the middle of it. It feels so much more like the life that I have come accustomed to, and understanding that I've got these highs, I've got these lows, and instead of trying to relate that to, this high is because I've been really good in my faith, and these lows are because I haven't been so good in my faith, it's really helped me understand that there's this fact that this is just the path of life, and it's not always the sunshines and rainbows, and it's not always the darkness, but it is always with God. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a famous book by Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled, and it starts off, life is difficult.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, once you understand that life is difficult, then it becomes less difficult, because you understand, like you're saying, that there are going to be difficult paths. And we'll get back to the psalm in that in a second. But I think that's an important thing for us to understand, because there is... there's just the nature of life. We're going to go through difficult seasons. I think sometimes in the Christian faith, and maybe it's just the way we state it or try to convince other people of it, is just like if you follow Jesus, your life is just going to be, all sunshine,
abundances and stuff like that,
and all of that. And it is the best way to, but it is not going to keep you from having to go through those difficult times. As you look at those biblical heroes that we talk about, every single one of them faced difficult circumstances in life. That's why our heroes, just how they handled it. And so what was interesting to me in breaking down this psalm, and it meant something to me, and it was really cool and encouraging to hear, because I've heard from several church members about like how this particular part of the sermon meant something to them. And that is, in the psalm, it goes from like, he leads me on the right path. That's the NIV. And then right after that, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Wait a second. What happened? I thought we were on the right path. But sometimes the right path takes us through a valley, because most of the times, and we can make our own dark valleys for sure.
Sure.
But sometimes not. Sometimes we are following God in all earnestness and praying and seeking God, and yet that path is going to take us through some difficult terrain. And I think acknowledging the core concept that you just beautifully talked about is that God is with you through all of those places and all of those steps along the way.
Yeah, I think that's the beautiful nature of these types of thoughts, because when we're talking about this expedition and this moving forward, we've often said on the podcast, sometimes it's just about putting that next foot in front of the other and keep going, and that's through all these terrains. It's through the goods, it's through the valleys, and I think that's just important for us to truly remember.
Yeah, and so here's a question I thought about. Thinking about that, how do we distinguish between a difficult season that is simply part of faithful living and a difficult season that might be actually telling us we need to change directions?
That's a great question.
Yeah, maybe that's this next sermon. I don't know.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think you could go a long time on that, because there's so many facets probably that go into deciding that, because is it led by personal ambition and pride? Is it led by us being faithful and following? There's so many criterias. I think that could.
I do think, though, getting back to the point, I do think that God may not have caused the difficult terrain that we have to walk through. That He may be leading us through to get from point A to point B. But He can certainly show us the way, and we can grow through that. He can create character in us through that, those parts of the journey. So,
I still would want to follow the guide through it, right? Because I could get into these valleys, and if I didn't have some sort of guide, I could easily get lost.
Yeah.
I think about some of these people who do long hikes and stuff like that, and if you don't have some sense of direction, or you don't have your compass, or you don't have your map, you can get lost on some of these hiking trails really easily. Some of them are not super well marked.
Yeah, some trails are not marked very well.
Right.
And sometimes even places like the Appalachian Trail and some other trails, it's confusing. Mm-hmm. There's some trails up around Amicalola, and there's like all these different colors. And sometimes it can be very confusing of which way to go, because because they give you the option of taking a 6-mile hike or a 2-mile hike, and you've got to follow the right colors to get to it. And it's like, oh, wait, was it green or yellow? And so it's,
But it's easier to keep finding your way with your guide in front of you. And I think that's what I keep thinking
someone
of.
who's been there before. Someone.
That kind of goes back to the last sermon, talking about doing it with community, but then also just reminding us, even in these times, trying to follow God, because He's the one leading our path through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I feel like we're going a little long today. Of course, we are doing 2 sermons.
2 sermons, yeah.
But we've done them kind of quickly. But I'm really enjoying this series. I love this stuff, and I hope other people are finding it helpful as well. And I think it's a great way for us to start out this fall. So
absolutely,
we'll continue.
It's a great reminder that we are all on some sort of journey, and where's that journey leading us? How do we do it intentionally? All that good stuff. I think using these common scriptures are also very cool, because it almost ties them together through a variety of different means. Here we are in Proverbs and Psalms, and I don't know.
We've got Matthew this week. But and so just to give you a little preview of this, because you kind of alluded to it a second ago, but if I had to title this one, it'd be Decision Point. and there's going to be a very cool time, or a very important time, on the journey where they were faced with a decision point. And it was like, do we go this way or do we go that way? And, it can say, well, they might have to backtrack it a while. But like when you were carrying all this stuff and had this whole expedition, and it's like all the stuff that they had with them and all the men, getting off the trail, or in this case, river, and going up the wrong river, it could be devastating for them.
Yeah.
And, the point in the journey they needed to get someplace before winter. And so they couldn't make that wrong decision. So how do we make the decisions on that when we're standing at a decision point? How do we know which way to go?
Right.
Particularly when both look like they could be just as well. It's very unclear. Is it this way or that way? And so we'll talk about that this Sunday. So
that'd be good, because we all face those kind of forks
all
in
the time.
life. You know what I mean? Of
All the time.
what's our next step and all that good stuff. So.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I thank you for the time and effort again you put into creating these sermons, and then this space where we get to kind of dive a little more into it. And we thank you guys for watching, and all of you for being a part of this podcast and this journey that we're all taking together. And do want to invite you, just in case you're not familiar, or maybe you're catching this on a social media feed that your friend posted or something, that we'd love for you, if you're looking for a faith home, a body of Christ to kind of come be a part of. We'd love to invite you to come join us on Sundays at 10 o'clock for our services. And throughout the week, we have a variety of different programs that you can get involved in, from men's, women's, senior adults, youth, children. There's a lot of places to get involved and connected and be a part of community, because at the very end, in all of these journeys, like Dave said earlier, it's important to do it with people.
In community.
And because having community at your back, beside you when things are going rough, just can change the whole trajectory.
Right.
And so love to encourage you. If you're looking for a place, come join us, come hang out. Or if you've been joining us, think about somebody who might need to be a part of the body and all that good stuff. But thank you guys for watching. If you have anything to add to our conversation, drop it below on the Facebook, YouTube, in the comments section. We try to catch up with those as much as possible. And Dave, anything here at the end?
No, just God bless everybody. Hope to see you on Sunday, either watching online or in person. And we'll just continue next week with our discussion.
That's right.
All right.
Well, this has been the Deep Dive with Dave and Nick. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.